everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is V. I'm an actuary and I'm currently working and living in Canada. So today is a special episode talking about the interview tips for actuarial position, especially for the actual student who are looking for their first co-op job or the first intern or the first entry-level job. So, and my guest for today is Mike. So he last year was on the channel and shared with us about different tips on application, networking, and interview. And today we will go into further about the different interview questions that you may get in an actual interview. Mike, welcome back to another episode with on my channel. So today's the topic is really about like interview questions for actuarial position, which I'm sure a lot of students are interested or aspiring actuaries are interested to know about. So for the first question, a lot of the time, even in my interview experience, the first question that I get to hear is like, tell me about yourself, or walk me through your resume. So what is your opinion for this type of question? Like, as the person that interview a lot of students, what do you expect to hear from this? Is there any good length for the answers, or what kind of details would you like to know from the answer?
A lot of people take those questions as being the same, and they're actually very different. So a lot of people here, tell me about yourself, and then they just start telling you their entire resume, like from top to bottom. They think that they just need to recite everything in their resume. And that's not actually what the purpose of the question is. So it's just kind of an introduction to you. So when we say, tell us about yourself, it's kind of your elevator pitch. Who you are as a person, usually how many exams you have, why you're there today, what made you interested in whatever company you're interviewing with, and what you're looking for. Like, are you looking for a specific term? Are you looking for a certain length of term? Things like that. They'll get to questions about specific things on your resume later. You don't need to, out of the beginning, think you need to recite the entire resume and spend 10 minutes doing that, unless they ask for that. So if they ask, like, walk me through your resume, then you're not doing that little short elevator pitch. You're actually sitting there and walking someone through your resume. A good suggestion I have for that question is making sure your resume is very well laid out, and that way it's easy to follow for you who's giving an answer and for the interviewer to follow along. So having your exams near the top, saying what school you go to, what program you're in, previous experience, your volunteer skills, and maybe some extracurriculars to show that you're well-rounded. Don't go into like super technical details of every single point on your resume. They'll get to those questions later on. It's just kind of just a general overview of your experience. And then if they're interested in something, into getting more detail about that topic, they'll ask you that question. So a lot of people get hung up that they want to go in right at the beginning and talk about how they coded something in GGY Access and what format of code they used and what the code accomplished. And that comes later. I think the first question is just to get a general sense of who you are and to explain yourself to the interviewer.
Okay, great. So what about technical question? Well, actuarial position, well, our job is supposed to be technical. So should candidates expect technical question, maybe like some scenario about Excel skill, Excel function, or maybe the technical knowledge for insurance concept, those type of things?
Yeah, this is something that I really like asking candidates that interview at other companies about, like, what kind of questions did you get in your interview? Because I'm interested to hear what other people are asking candidates. You should definitely expect some kind of technical questions. Now, how that interviewer is going to test your technical skills really depends on the company. I've heard of some people where someone asks you to actually code during your interview or explain a certain statistical concept. And then there's maybe a little less technical, but still testing your technical skills. Explain to me what you're learning on your newest actuarial exam and some of the concepts you've learned so far. So the range of questions you can get on the technical answer or technical questions can vary, but you should be prepared for anything. And it's okay if the answer is you don't know. A lot of people who are interviewing for maybe their first or second co-op term might have worked in the life insurance industry and not P&C or vice versa, or you worked in consulting and you want to try something new. So if they ask you to explain a specific concept from exam STAM and you haven't taken exam STAM yet, it's okay to say you don't know. A lot of people will try to like make something up or recite a Wikipedia page, and that's not necessarily the best. It's more to see what you've learned so far in those types of questions.
I have to say, even for me, I don't really like technical questions. Because sometimes, like I just say, like, oh, in real day work, if I don't remember anything, just look it up. The main thing is whether I understand it or can pick it up quickly after the search or not. But yeah, I know that sometimes technical question is like, it's a way to test to see like how one person explain a difficult concept in a simple term, and to see how the communication skill is, and that's important to become an actuary. So how about behavioral questions? Any advice for this type of questions? Maybe about the structure of the response, or is there anything specific that you would be looking for?
Yeah, so a lot of companies ask those tell me about a time when questions, and they ask you to relate it to something on your resume or something that's not on your resume because they might want to learn something else about you. Where people tend to get stuck in those situations is they always talk about the same topic. So say you've had one previous co-op experience, and they say, tell us about a time when you had to manage conflicting priorities, and you used your previous co-op term as an example. That's great. But then the next question, when it's, tell us about a time when, I'm trying to think of another one. Maybe the other question is, tell us about a time when you had a disagreement with a coworker. They'll go back and use the same one experience they have on their resume, and it starts to get repetitive and boring. So have little examples from other things on your resume or from outside, like schoolwork or previous non-actuarial work, to just kind of keep the flow of the interview going. Like, you don't want it to be only the one thing that you have on your resume is all you talk about. You want to show that you have all of these experiences that are going to help you become a better actuary. So thinking about the question and coming up with an example is really important. And then my other piece of advice is actually make sure that it answers the question. Don't just kind of make up a scenario that doesn't answer the question, but you think it sounds cool. Like, actually make sure you're answering the question that's being asked of you, because it really shows your analytical skills and your ability to communicate effectively if you're actually answering the interviewer's question. So that's really important too. And yeah, that would be my advice for the behavioral type questions.
Yeah, those are very good tips, because it's been like want to show that we have different experiences and that we can handle different situations. And the second advice that you gave is really about get to the point of making sure that we answer the question. And I also heard like another tip is to not really to in the interview itself, but it's like to prepare for an interview. Maybe throughout the experiences, one can keep a journal of the different situations that you face at work or at any volunteering experiences or at school, like you say, and then keep track of those. So then you have a lot of different scenarios that you can use for the interview. So I think that makes sense and go well with what you just said earlier too.
Yeah, the other piece of advice I would give is if you have a question where a scenario doesn't necessarily pop into your head right away, don't just say the first thing that pops into your head. Like, actually sit and think about it and think, like, is this going to answer the question that they're asking? I can tell you examples offline about where people didn't answer the question properly, but they thought they were maybe taking too long. And so they just blurted the first thing that came into their mind, but it didn't answer the question at all. And it didn't make them look like a good candidate. So like you said, being prepared, having a kind of scenarios in your mind of things you can talk about. And then if you need a minute, take that minute. No one's going to mind if you take a minute to think of a good answer for the interview question.
Absolutely. So at the end of the interview, we usually ask the candidate like whether they have any questions. So would you say that if the candidate didn't really do well during interview, but they have some good question during this time, would they be able to save their impression? And can you share some of the questions that maybe impressed you in the past?
Yeah, it really depends how poorly they did in the previous part of the interview if they can save themselves. Good questions definitely help you stand out though. So if it's between you and another candidate, the questions that you ask or you showing interest in the company can really help put you over the edge of being the candidate that's selected. So it's not necessarily the questions you ask, but more so showing the interest in that company, I would say is probably the most important. However, the question part can let you down. Like you should have questions prepared. Don't say you don't have any questions. That just makes it look like you didn't really look into the company you're interviewing with and you're not really that interested. And be careful of the types of questions you ask. I actually saw a really good article on LinkedIn the other day about what not to ask during an interview. And it's basically like anything that you wouldn't want to be asked in line at a Starbucks or at a bar or like in a not like you don't want to ask questions that you would ask in a non-professional setting. So you want to ask questions that you would feel comfortable asking in a workplace, or you would feel comfortable asking at a Starbucks to someone that you don't really know. You don't want to ask questions about pay or like how much the interviewer gets paid. That's been a question people ask that is kind of inappropriate. Or something that doesn't actually deal with doing the job. It's a really cool LinkedIn article that I suggest everyone reads. So like telling the interviewer like, oh, I really like your smile. Like that's not really a part of the interview process. And like, I'm not picking who's getting a job based on smile. So you shouldn't be commenting on the interviewer's smile. So just making sure you're professional and taking the interview seriously, because you are going to be a reflection of the company that hires you. So they want to make sure that you are a professional person in this actuarial type role.
That makes sense. Actually, it's interesting about a pay. So when should candidate ask about pay? Is it only after the final interview that they get the offer, or when they deal with maybe HR?
Yeah. So usually what happens is when you do get the offer, like you'll have your interview and then HR will call you with the offer. The actuarial industry is really nice because they have a lot of information online. So you can look up based on how much experience you have and how many exams you have around what you should be getting paid. So you can kind of tell ballpark what you should be getting as your offer. So if it's vastly different from that, that's when you bring it up to HR, like, oh, I was expecting to make X amount instead of Y. And then usually they would go back and talk to the person offering you the job. But if you can ask about like around what amount would you be getting paid, like during the interview. I know like certain schools, like University of Waterloo pops into mind, they encourage students to ask about pay, and sometimes companies even put the pay right when they're doing their ranking process. So you can do that. I mean, when I say don't ask about pay, don't ask about like the interviewer's pay. Like, oh, how much do you make? Like, it's just not really appropriate to ask someone what they make. And you wouldn't want a random stranger asking you at Starbucks what you get paid. So those are things you shouldn't ask during an interview. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I make it sound like people don't ask it, but you'd be surprised. Like people ask crazy questions that you shouldn't be asking. So another piece of advice I have is ask your friends, like, do you think these are good questions to ask an interviewer? Or ask your friends your questions and see how they would answer them. And if they're like, I wouldn't answer that question in an interview, you probably shouldn't be asking the interviewer that question.
That's a good tip. At the end of the day, it's like practice with other people and be prepared for this. Yeah. So given that you usually interview like several candidates a day, especially like maybe for internship and co-op position, how can one stand out among many candidates? Like any final advice for the student in order to have like a great interview or to leave like a very good impression?
Yeah. So at ASNA, or if recruiters going to your school, they're probably blocking a huge amount of people in one day, like back to back to back. So a lot of students try to put their interview like first thing in their morning, because that's when they have the most energy. They're ready to go. They want to be like first in mind of the interviewer, which is great. It's a good tip. I know a lot of people fight for those first few spots. I necessarily don't mind what time of the day I have an interviewer. Just make sure it's when you have the highest amount of energy. You're excited to be there. It's your priority. That's when your interview should be. You shouldn't be putting your interview before your midterm or like directly after your midterm when you're super burnt out. You should make it so that it's far enough from your midterm that you can go there. It's what you're thinking about. And then when you leave, you go think about your midterm. Or you write the midterm early in the morning and then you have your interview in the afternoon and you've had lunch. Maybe you work out or watch a TV show in order to relax and kind of then be able to focus on your interview. So kind of separating that. Now, I know that's hard when sometimes it doesn't line up with your midterm schedule. Like sometimes you just need to get a slot for your interview and you have midterms before and after and you're always studying. But really make sure that you put the time in before that interview then and have things that you know are going on and then go into that interview with the energy you know you need to be able to talk to the interviewer, because the students that stand out the most are the students that are excited to be there and aren't the students that are running late or when they do get there, they're not prepared or they're not even interested because they haven't even had time to research the company. You're kind of wasting the interviewer's time and you're probably not going to get selected.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's like the positive energy, the interest, the enthusiasm, like it shows either in person and also virtually. So for sure, I totally agree with that. Thanks again, Mike, for sharing your experiences interviewing many students, and I hope they learn from this video and can prepare for their actuarial interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dee.
I hope you find today's video helpful for your future actuarial interview. And if you like it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you in another video. Bye now.